Your great-great-grandmother could have been executed for the meal she fed her family. Not poison, not stolen goods, just dinner. But here's what's insane. Modern lab results show these criminal ingredients outperform every supplement in your cabinet right now. In 1482, the English crown made it a crime to own an unmarked swan on open water. The punishment? A full year in prison for a bird. Now, before you laugh, understand that swan wasn't just fancy dinner theater for royals. This bird was basically the medieval equivalent of Wagyu beef crossed with a status symbol. Kings ate it at coronations. Lords served it at Christmas. And if you were a peasant caught with one, well, hope you enjoyed that meal because it's the last good one you're having for 12 months. Here's where it gets interesting. Modern nutritionists actually looked at swan meat and they found something the nobles accidentally got right. Swan contains nearly double the iron of chicken. The flesh is dark, rich, closer to venison than poultry. And because these birds spend their lives eating aquatic plants and small fish, their fat is loaded with omega-3 fatty acids. So while peasants were gnawing on tough bread, the aristocracy was unknowingly loading up on brain-healthy fats and blood-building iron. Funny how that works, but the medieval obsession went deeper than nutrition. Nobles genuinely believed eating swan transferred the bird's qualities to them. Grace, longevity, elegance. I mean, have you watched a swan move? Pure poetry on water. Have you watched one attack a kayaker? Pure chaos and violence. Maybe they absorbed both qualities. The crown took this so seriously that stealing a swan carried the same penalty as stealing a horse, and horse theft could get you executed. Over a bird, people. A bird that honks and chases children. Want to know the wildest part? This law never really went away. The British monarch still technically owns all unmarked mute swans in open English waters today. Queen Elizabeth reportedly loved reminding people of this fact. So swan went from superfood to forbidden fruit. Not because it was dangerous or unhealthy, but because it was too good. The powerful wanted it for themselves. And speaking of powerful people hoarding the good stuff, the Catholic Church pulled an even sneakier move with the next food on our list. Whale meat, the ultimate religious loophole. Here's the thing about medieval Catholics. They couldn't eat meat for over 180 days per year. That's half the calendar spent avoiding beef, pork, and poultry. But fish? Fish was fair game. So some very clever church officials looked at whales and thought, lives in water, swims around, close enough. They classified whale as fish. Suddenly, you could eat a 40-ton mammal during Lent while your neighbor got in trouble for nibbling bacon. The logic was questionable, but the protein was undeniable. And honestly, they stumbled onto something nutritionally brilliant by accident. Whale meat packs iron levels that rival beef liver. Medieval populations suffered from anemia constantly, women especially. The symptoms included exhaustion, pale skin, weakness. Doctors back then blamed bad air or evil spirits. Turns out people just needed more iron, and whale delivered it by the boatload, literally. The Basque whalers figured this out early. These fishermen from northern Spain became so skilled at hunting right whales that they depleted entire Atlantic populations by the 1500s. A single whale could feed a village for months. The blubber rendered into oil for lamps, soap, cooking. Nothing went to waste. Modern nutritional testing reveals something else. Whale meat contains all 9 essential amino acids in highly bioavailable form. Your body absorbs these proteins efficiently. No digestive gymnastics required. But here's where it gets interesting. The Pope eventually caught on. Around the 1600s, church authorities officially reclassified whale as meat. Loophole closed. Suddenly, this protein powerhouse became forbidden during fasting periods. The timing was terrible. Or convenient, depending on your perspective. Whale populations were already crashing from overhunting. Making it harder to eat whale probably saved a few species from complete extinction. So the church accidentally became early conservationists. I'm sure that wasn't the intention, but I'll give them credit anyway. Now, whale required ships and harpoons and serious hunting skills. But what if I told you there was a superfood medieval people gathered just by climbing some rocks? Here's the thing about chicken eggs. We treat them like they're the gold standard, the perfect food. But medieval coastal communities knew something better existed, and governments eventually made it illegal to collect. Seagull eggs. Now, before you scrunch up your face, hear me out. These eggs contain 50% more vitamin D than chicken eggs. 50%. For people living in places like Scotland or Norway, where the sun basically takes a 6-month vacation, that's not a small thing. That's survival. And the yolks? Forget that pale yellow you see at the grocery store. Seagull egg yolks are intensely orange, almost red. They're nearly twice the size proportionally compared to chicken eggs, absolutely loaded with carotenoids. You know, the same compounds people pay extra for in pasture-raised organic eggs today. Medieval villages along European coastlines built their entire spring around collecting these things. I'm talking full-on festivals, celebrations. Why? Because spring was when food stores ran lowest and nutrition was scarcest. These eggs showed up right when people needed them most. But here's where it gets dark. Gathering these eggs meant scaling cliffs, actual cliffs. No safety equipment, no ropes in many cases, just you, some rocks, and a really hungry family waiting below. Falls happened so often that some villages had a special term for the women whose husbands died collecting eggs. Egg widows. Let that sink in. People died regularly enough doing this that they needed a word for it. That's how valuable these eggs were. So what happened? Overharvesting. People collected millions of them yearly until seagull populations started crashing. Government stepped in with restrictions that basically ended the practice. Today, only one beach in England still legally allows seagull egg collection. And even there, you can only gather them for 40 days per year. That's it. The eggs sell at fancy London restaurants for ridiculous prices, and most people have completely forgotten they were ever a staple food. But those dormice I mentioned earlier, the Romans had an even stranger relationship with them than coastal villagers had with seagull eggs. Here's the thing about dormice. They're adorable, fluffy little creatures with big eyes that look like they belong on a greeting card. The Romans looked at them and thought, you know what? I bet those are delicious. And they weren't wrong. Romans actually invented special clay jars called gleraria. These weren't storage containers. They were basically tiny dormouse apartments designed to fatten the animals up on walnuts and chestnuts until they were plump enough to serve. Then, they glazed them in honey and popped them in their mouths like furry little appetizers. Sounds barbaric? Maybe. But nutritionally, these Romans were onto something. Dormouse meat packs complete proteins with an amino acid profile nearly identical to rabbit. That same rabbit meat that fitness influencers won't shut up about today. One tiny dormouse delivered roughly 30 grams of protein. That's more than a scoop of your overpriced whey powder. The efficiency was remarkable too. Unlike raising a pig or cow, dormice needed almost no feed. They fattened themselves on nuts that grew wild everywhere. Basically free protein if you had the patience. But then the church stepped in. Multiple times, actually. Catholic authorities kept banning dormouse consumption, calling it too indulgent, too connected to pagan Roman excess. Eating dormice apparently made you spiritually suspicious. Who knew a rodent could threaten your immortal soul? Did medieval Italians care? Not even slightly. They kept breeding dormice in secret. Recipes pop up in cookbooks from the 1400s, though writers used code words to avoid church scrutiny. It's like they were running underground speakeasies, except instead of bootleg whiskey, they were smuggling extremely small rodents. And here's what really gets me. Slovenia still farms and eats dormice today. Legally. They consider it a protected cultural tradition. Meanwhile, the rest of us completely forgot this protein-packed food ever existed. We threw away 2,000 years of culinary knowledge because some medieval bureaucrats thought tiny sleeping rodents were morally problematic. But dormice aren't the strangest animal the church reclassified to work around food rules. Wait until you hear what they decided about beavers. Here's the thing about beaver tails. The Catholic Church looked at a flat, scaly appendage attached to a furry mammal and said, yeah, that's a fish. I'm not making this up. Because beavers spent their lives swimming around in water, church authorities in the 17th century officially classified their tails as fish, which meant Catholics could eat them during Lent and Fridays and all those other fasting days when regular meat was forbidden. Convenient? Absolutely. But here's where it gets interesting. Beaver tail fat is 70% monounsaturated. That's the exact same heart-healthy fat profile that makes olive oil the darling of every nutritionist on the planet. Medieval theologians accidentally approved one of the healthiest fats you can eat. Fur traders crossing North America survived entire winters on this stuff. When temperatures dropped to 40 below and fresh vegetables were a distant memory, beaver tail kept them alive. The tail was roasted over fire until the scaly outer skin peeled right off, revealing meat that witnesses described as tasting like roast beef. Now, I've tried some weird foods in my time, but roast beef from a giant rodent? That's commitment. Indigenous peoples knew something European doctors wouldn't figure out for centuries. They taught settlers that beaver tail could cure scurvy. Science eventually confirmed this. The tail contains vitamin C. Not a lot, but enough to prevent your teeth from falling out when you're trapped in a frozen wilderness eating nothing but dried meat. But the beaver's real legacy isn't nutritional. Demand for beaver pelts and meat literally shaped North America. Trappers pushed west following beaver populations. They mapped rivers, established trading posts, built relationships with indigenous nations. The entire interior of Canada was explored because Europeans wanted beaver products. A rodent with a flat tail built empires. The Hudson's Bay Company became one of the most powerful corporations in history, all because people couldn't get enough of this animal. Beaver pelts were currency. Beaver meat was survival food. And speaking of survival food that killed royalty, King Henry I of England died in 1135. The cause? According to his own doctors, he ate too many lampreys against medical advice. That's right, a king got taken out by an eel-looking fish. Now, I'm not saying the lampreys murdered him intentionally, but I'm also not saying they didn't know what they were doing. These things have been around for 350 million years. They've outlasted dinosaurs. They might be playing the long game. Here's what makes this story even stranger. Despite literally killing royalty, lampreys remained one of the most prized foods in medieval England. The city of Gloucester sent a lamprey pie to every English monarch for over 800 years straight. 8 centuries of pie delivery. That's commitment. Why the obsession? Well, lampreys contain EPA and DHA omega-3 fatty acids at levels that actually exceed salmon pound for pound. The same stuff people pay $30 a bottle for at the supplement store was swimming in medieval rivers for free. But the cooking method is where things get interesting. Medieval chefs cooked lamprey in its own blood, creating a thick, dark sauce. Sounds gruesome, right? Turns out the blood sauce preserved the B12 and iron that would otherwise cook away. They accidentally stumbled onto nutritional science 500 years before microscopes existed. The problem came later. Overfishing and dam construction nearly wiped lampreys out of European rivers entirely. A fish common enough to kill kings became virtually extinct on restaurant menus. And then came the comeback nobody expected. Queen Elizabeth II received a lamprey pie for her Diamond Jubilee in 2012. The catch? They couldn't find enough lampreys in Britain anymore. They had to import them from the Great Lakes in America. Let that sink in. A traditional British royal dish now requires fish from Michigan. I've never tried lamprey myself. Something about the blood sauce makes me hesitate, but apparently it tastes somewhere between eel and mushroom. Speaking of foods that got replaced by something else entirely, there's a root vegetable so delicious that a Roman emperor valued it more than silver. Here's the thing about potatoes. They're fine, they're reliable, but they basically committed culinary murder when they showed up from the Americas. The victim? Skirret. Never heard of it? Neither had I until I stumbled across a medieval monastery garden list. This sweet root vegetable was everywhere in Europe for over 1,000 years. Then potatoes arrived, and farmers dropped skirret faster than a hot panhandle. Big mistake. Skirret looks like a cluster of pale, finger-sized roots. Tastes naturally sweet without adding anything. Food historians describe it as what would happen if a parsnip and sweet potato had a delicious baby. Emperor Tiberius of Rome loved this stuff so much that he demanded Germanic tribes pay their taxes with it. Not gold, not silver, skirret roots. Let that sink in. A Roman emperor valued this vegetable more than precious metals. And nutritionally, modern science says Tiberius was onto something. Skirret contains inulin fiber, which sounds boring until you learn what it does. This fiber feeds the good bacteria in your gut. It's basically a prebiotic that keeps your digestive system running smooth. We pay good money for supplements that do what this forgotten vegetable does naturally. Medieval monks grew skirret specifically for their hospital gardens. When patients were too sick to handle heavy foods, they got skirret. Easy to digest, gentle on the stomach, full of nutrients. These monks didn't have science degrees, but they figured out through centuries of observation what worked. The really frustrating part? This plant grows like a weed. It tolerates cold weather. It doesn't need fancy soil. It survives neglect. Basically, the opposite of those temperamental heirloom tomatoes that die if you look at them wrong. Yet almost nobody farms it commercially anymore. You can still find seeds online. The plant grows perfectly well in American gardens. But we collectively forgot it existed because potatoes were easier to harvest and stored better. We traded a nutritional powerhouse for convenience. Speaking of forgotten nutrition, there's a weed growing in your sidewalk cracks right now that medieval people actually cultivated on purpose. Purslane might be the most insulting entry on this list. Not because of what it is, because of what we do to it. Every summer, millions of Americans dump herbicide on this plant growing in their driveways. Then those same people drive to the pharmacy and spend $40 on omega-3 supplements. The omega-3s in those pills? Purslane has more per leaf than any other vegetable on Earth. I'm not exaggerating. This little succulent contains omega-3 fatty acids at levels that approach actual fish, a leafy green, with fish oil levels. Scientists ran the tests 3 times because they didn't believe it either. Medieval Europeans knew something was special about this stuff. They threw it in salads, cooked it into soups, and grew it intentionally in gardens. The Greeks ate it. The Romans ate it. Egyptian medical texts prescribed it for inflammation thousands of years ago. Then garden fashion changed. Sometime in the 1700s, wealthy Europeans decided ornamental flowers looked better than edible plants. Purslane got the boot. Within a few generations, people forgot it was food at all, started calling it a weed, started poisoning it. Here's what the USDA found when they actually bothered to test it. Purslane has 6 times more vitamin E than spinach, 7 times more beta-carotene than carrots. It's also loaded with magnesium, potassium, and vitamin C. And the plant is basically immortal. Drought that kills your tomatoes? Purslane survives. Heat wave that wilts your lettuce? Purslane thrives. It's so tough that medieval farmers used it as famine insurance. When everything else died, purslane kept growing. The taste is slightly tangy, a bit lemony with a pleasant crunch. My grandmother used to pickle it. I thought she was being cheap. Turns out she was being smart. You can find this growing in any parking lot crack in America right now. Free. Packed with nutrients. And we're paying companies to help us kill it. But purslane isn't the only medieval food we declared war on for bizarre reasons. The next one got banned because Puritans thought eating it was literally satanic. Here's the thing about bone marrow. We've been eating it for 2 million years. 2 million. That's not a typo. Anthropologists found ancient bones cracked open in patterns that prove early humans were after the marrow inside long before they figured out how to hunt big game. Our ancestors weren't chasing down mammoths. They were scavenging carcasses and smashing femurs with rocks to get at the fatty goodness inside. Basically, we were the weird kids licking the bowl before we were apex predators. And what did that marrow contain? Alkylglycerols. Never heard of them? Most people haven't. These compounds support your immune system and help produce white blood cells. Modern researchers are studying them for everything from radiation recovery to cancer support. Our caveman ancestors didn't know the science. They just knew this stuff kept them alive. Fast forward to medieval times, peasants couldn't afford the fancy cuts of meat. So they boiled bones for days, sometimes a week. Every scrap of nutrition got pulled into those broths. Collagen for joints, calcium for bones, gelatin for gut health. The rich ate roasted pheasant and got gout. The poor sipped bone broth and stayed healthier than anyone realized. Then the Victorians came along and ruined everything. Suddenly, eating marrow was barbaric. It was peasant food. Lower class. If you wanted to be respectable, you kept bones off your table. The same Victorians who thought lead made excellent face powder decided marrow was too primitive. The irony is thick enough to spread on toast. 1 tablespoon of bone marrow gives you 10% of your daily vitamin A. It delivers vitamin K2, something most Americans are deficient in without even knowing. It's packed with healthy fats that support brain function. Now, walk into any trendy restaurant in New York or Los Angeles. Check the appetizer menu. Roasted bone marrow with sea salt and crusty bread. $25. Minimum. Sometimes $30. Medieval peasants got this for free from the butcher's scraps. But bone marrow isn't even the most controversial food on this list. That honor goes to something Puritans literally called satanic. Blood sausage. The one food on this list that got banned for being literally satanic. The Puritans weren't messing around. They opened their Bibles, found passages forbidding the consumption of blood, and declared this stuff the devil's breakfast. Colonial America, banned. Puritan England, absolutely not. They treated blood sausage like we treat controlled substances today. Here's what makes this hilarious, though. While the Puritans were busy saving souls from sausage, their women were fainting from anemia. Up to 40% of medieval women suffered from iron deficiency. And the cure? The exact food they'd outlawed. One serving of blood sausage delivers 15 milligrams of iron. That's more than your entire daily requirement. And it's heme iron, the kind your body actually absorbs properly. You'd need to eat 3 pounds of spinach to match it. Popeye was working way too hard. Medieval butchers were geniuses at zero waste. Fresh pig blood, some oatmeal, onions, fat, seasonings. Mix it all together, stuff it in intestine casings, and you've got survival food that kept families alive through brutal winters. Nothing fancy, just pure, dense nutrition. The British call it black pudding. The French say boudin noir. Same recipe, same ancient technique, same food that's been feeding Europeans for over 1,000 years despite everyone trying to ban it. And the weird part is, the banning never really stopped. The USDA restricted blood sausage imports in the 1970s over safety concerns. Different century, same suspicion. This poor sausage just can't catch a break. I tried it for the first time in Ireland. Looked terrifying. Tasted incredible. Rich, earthy, slightly sweet from the oatmeal. My Irish grandmother would have been proud. My American friends were horrified. Today, you can find blood sausage in specialty shops and trendy brunch spots. The same food Puritans called demonic now costs $18 on a hipster menu next to avocado toast. Every single food on this list tells the same story. Authorities banned it. Science proved them wrong. And now we're slowly rediscovering what medieval people knew all along. Sometimes the old ways were the right ways.